Neanderthals lived in a world where nature showed no mercy. They faced icy winds, predators the size of horses, and a constant battle against hunger. Their average lifespan barely reached past 30. To survive, they had to adapt, change, evolve. And even then, most of their life was a struggle. No comfort, no pity, no chance to rest. Neanderthals weren't our ancestors. They were a separate species of ancient human, Homo neanderthalensis. Scientists believe they fully emerged around 130,000 years ago. Their bodies were built for the cold, short, wide, and incredibly strong. On average, they stood about 5'5" and weighed between 150 and 175 pounds. Their physique was more like that of a powerlifter. Their skin was pale to catch every bit of light. Their hair, thick and coarse like animal fur. Their faces were long with prominent jaws. And their brains, even larger than ours. But that didn't mean they were smarter, just different. Much of that brainpower was used for physical control, vision, and spatial awareness. They roamed lands stretching from the Atlantic to the Altai Mountains. In harsh climates, they mastered fire, crafted advanced tools from stone, bone, and hide, and built shelters to withstand the elements. They even buried their dead, one of the earliest signs of a developing consciousness. Neanderthals lived in an age when nature itself was the enemy. Europe back then wasn't lush or green. It was a land of frozen steppes stretching for hundreds of miles. The ground was stone and ice. The wind cut like a blade. The sun barely warmed the earth, and darkness came early, and stayed. Ice ages came and went, interrupted only by brief thaws. But even in the best years, the climate was unforgiving. During peak glacial periods, temperatures could hover around -30 degrees Celsius. Snow blanketed the land for months. The wind drained strength and burned the skin. Food sources were scarce. Only the toughest plants survived: moss, lichen, and stunted shrubs. Forests were rare, and even when you found a tree, it might be rotted through or too thin to use. Every piece of usable wood was a treasure. Life unfolded in a world of constant cold and colorless landscapes. Around them, gray rocks, white snow, frozen carcasses, and dead soil. To stay warm, they had to hunt, not just for meat, but for fat. Fat was energy. Fat was survival. Only thick hides could protect them at night, when the temperature plummeted without warning. For the most part, Neanderthals lived in caves, homes passed down through countless generations. But when game became scarce, they'd leave their shelter behind and move on. What remained at these sites, ashes from fires, scattered bones, broken tools, and weapons, was slowly buried under layers of soil and stone. Decades, centuries, even millennia later, another group would settle there, leaving their own mark, another layer of life entombed by time. These layers, known as cultural strata, are how archaeologists trace the evolution of humans, their changing tools, habits, and the shifting climate across thousands of years. But even a cave was no sanctuary, just a compromise. Inside, it was damp, cold, and dark. Mold crept across the walls. The ground rotted beneath their feet. Smoke from fires built up and filled their lungs. Wild animals could slip in. Hyenas, wolves, even bears. Sometimes an entire group was slaughtered in their sleep, torn apart in silence. Sometimes disease would break out, and in a sealed, crowded space, there was nowhere to run. That's why, over time, Neanderthals began building shelters of their own, usually in open areas, but near water sources and animal migration paths. The framework came from massive bones, skulls, scapulas, mammoth tusks, driven into the ground and covered with hides, held down by stones. The result was a kind of half-dome tent, windproof and insulated. Fires were lit inside. The floors were lined with dry grass or moss. These shelters gave them freedom from caves and a fighting chance to survive in places where people once would have frozen to death. These weren't permanent homes, but they were essential. They allowed Neanderthals to follow the herds instead of waiting for hunger to come. When animals moved south, they followed. When spring returned, they came back. Life moved with the rhythm of the wild, hunting, migrating, surviving. Inside, there was no comfort, only function. Skins were layered thick to block the frozen ground. In the center burned a fire ringed by stones, bones, and scraps of wood, shielding the flame from the wind. Food was cooked right on the coals. Bones were reused, turned into tools, hooks, needles. What couldn't be used was thrown far from the shelter to keep away the stink and the beasts it might attract. But that didn't always work. Sometimes predators came anyway. Sometimes so did other humans. They rarely stockpiled food. Preservation was nearly impossible. Without salt, smoke, or pottery, meat spoiled quickly, even in the cold. Sometimes they buried a carcass under frozen soil, covered it with snow and rocks to keep it from scavengers. But it didn't always help, so they ate it while it was fresh, then went hunting again the next day. Shelters were often built against cliffs or ravines, not for comfort, but to blunt the wind. Sometimes they left skulls or bones from their kills nearby, not as a ritual, but as a barrier. The smell of decay could scare off predators. Sometimes that made the difference between life and death. These shelters weren't organized by modern standards, but they had structure. One corner held ashes and charcoal, burned bones scattered nearby. Another had flint chips, half-finished tools. Occasionally, archaeologists find items with no clear practical use: painted stones, bits of ochre, necklaces made from teeth. These weren't accidents. Even in this frozen hell, Neanderthals tried to make sense of the world, to decorate their space, to make it just a little less hostile. For Neanderthals, hunting wasn't just about getting food. It was the center of life. No meat meant death. No fat meant freezing. No hide meant no shelter. That's why they devoted most of their time and energy to the hunt. They targeted animals we now see only in museums: mammoths, woolly rhinos, cave bears, bison, wild horses, giant deer with antlers spanning over 6 feet. These beasts were massive, strong, and dangerous. One mistake, and the hunter became the hunted. They had no bows, just heavy spears tipped with sharpened stone, and these weren't thrown from a distance. They were driven into flesh up close. Neanderthals had to get right next to the animal to strike with precision. Sometimes they dug pits, chased prey into swamps, or triggered rock slides, all with the simplest tools. The spear itself was made from a straight dried shaft. The tip was sharpened, then fitted with a flint point, often tied on with sinew and resin. Flint was a prize material, tough, easy to split, with razor-sharp edges. From it, they also made knives, scrapers, and cutting tools. Every stone mattered. It could mean survival. While they didn't have complex tactics, Neanderthals knew how to work together. They used short vocal sounds, hand signs, and gestures, replacing words with coordination. They may have had a primitive language, but none of it survives today. Instead, they relied on instinct, memory, and years of learned skill. One would distract the animal head-on. Others circled behind. One made noise. The rest waited in silence. Dragging a carcass back to shelter was just the beginning. It had to be butchered quickly, before it spoiled, before predators smelled blood, before nightfall. Bones were cracked open for the brain, a rich source of fat. The hide was carefully removed to be used for warmth. Some organs were eaten immediately, others stored or used. Even tendons and sinews were saved, dried and used as cords or bindings for tools. Blood was collected in bones or shells, used for drinking or boiled with meat. Nothing went to waste. Even broken scraps ended up in the fire pit, burned as fuel when wood was scarce. Large bones became hammers. Smaller ones turned into needles or scrapers. There was no formal chain of command, but roles were clear. The strongest hunted. The older or injured prepared the meat, crafted tools, and cared for the young. Women and men both took part in hunts, especially when prey had to be driven from multiple directions. Children began learning from the start. First they watched, then they helped, and eventually they took over. Hunger wasn't an exception. It was the norm. Hunts failed, herds moved on, storms rolled in, and suddenly the entire group stood at the edge. In those moments, death came quickly, especially for the weak, the sick, and the young. Food ran out, and nature offered no second chances. That's when something happened. Something that shocks us today, but once saved lives. Cannibalism. Archaeologists have uncovered human bones with cut marks identical to those seen on butchered animals. flint knife traces, burn patterns, crushed skulls, and cracked femurs. All signs that human bodies were processed just like game. This wasn't a ritual, it wasn't a belief system, it was survival. When someone in the group died, they weren't buried, they were taken apart. That could buy another day, another night. Sometimes they consumed enemies, sometimes their own. For Neanderthals, hunting wasn't a heroic spear throw. It was close-quarters combat with animals that could crush, gore, or tear them apart. Injuries were common. Kicks from hooves, gashes from tusks, broken bones from falls and rock slides. They lived in a world where nearly every adult carried the scars of survival. Archaeologists have found bones with fractures that had time to heal. That means the injured person didn't just survive, they were cared for. Someone brought them food, someone kept the fire going, someone waited until they could stand again. That wasn't luck, that was compassion. In a world where every member mattered, losing even one meant weakening the whole group. Some burials reveal individuals who lived into their 40s, despite severe injuries. Some had limb atrophy, twisted spines, even complete tooth loss. They couldn't hunt, they couldn't feed themselves, but someone fed them. Primitive medicine did exist. Thorns were pulled out. Wounds were cleaned. Moss was used as bandages. Ash acted as an antiseptic. Animal fat sealed wounds and helped prevent infection. Maybe they used herbs that helped by accident. Maybe they didn't know why it worked, only that it eased the pain. There's even evidence of amputations, where the person survived, meaning not only was the limb removed, but the bleeding was stopped and infection was somehow prevented. Neanderthals didn't just look different. And it wasn't just their skulls or heavy brows. Their entire bodies were shaped by evolution to survive the harshest environments imaginable. They were shorter than modern humans, but wider and more powerfully built. Their rib cages were barrel-shaped, their ribs thick and dense, and their shoulders broad. Their arms were shorter, but stronger. Their bones, heavier, thicker, made to endure. It gave them the power to drag carcasses, butcher meat, haul hides, and keep going without wearing down. Genetic studies show that Neanderthals had naturally higher levels of creatine, a compound that boosts muscle strength and endurance. In other words, they were born stronger, not from training, from biology. But it wasn't just their muscles. Their vision was likely superior in low light. They had large eye sockets and an expanded visual cortex. They could navigate forests, mountains, and the dim interiors of caves. Their sense of smell was also enhanced. The parts of the brain linked to olfaction were larger. They could detect the scent of prey, water, smoke, or even blood on snow. As for hearing, some studies suggest they were especially sensitive to low-frequency sounds. That matters in the wild. It helps with long-distance communication, through roars, echoes, stomps. Even without a complex spoken language, they could hear each other across the wind. Their skin was likely thicker, better at holding heat. They had more brown fat, the kind that burns energy to keep the body warm. Even their faces were adapted. Their large noses helped warm the air before it reached the lungs. Every part of their body, from fingertips to nasal structure, told the same story. They weren't built for comfort. They were built for survival. Neanderthals died young, very young. The average life expectancy was around 30 years. Fewer than 1 in 10 made it to 40. Not because of old age, but because of relentless pressure from every direction. Cold, hunger, injury, and violence. Danger was constant. Outside the shelter lurked cave lions, hyenas, bears, wolves. One wrong step, one sign of blood or weakness, and the hunter became prey. Bite marks and claw scratches on bones confirm it. Many Neanderthals died in brutal encounters with predators. Some sites are nothing but graveyards, bones mixed with tools, signs of hasty escape, shattered fire pits. These weren't just animal attacks. Sometimes the killers were other humans. Violence between groups was real. Skulls with fatal blows, fractured ribs, caved-in craniums. Sometimes the wounds had started to heal. Other times, they were fatal. These weren't accidents. These were murders, fights over territory, over food, over a cave, a place by the fire. Neanderthals didn't live in a world of negotiation. They lived in a world where strangers meant danger. Disease killed too. Infections, poisoning, frostbite. A simple scratch could turn septic. Teeth decayed early. Many died from abscesses. Children suffered from rickets. adults from arthritis. Fatigue never lifted. Wounds didn't heal. Even a basic fall could be fatal. If there was no one left to help, children were the most vulnerable. Most didn't live past age 5. The reasons were many: weak immunity, cold, diarrhea, injuries, animal attacks. If the mother couldn't nurse, death. If the child fell and broke a limb, death. If sickness struck, death. In almost every Neanderthal site, there are tiny bones, too small to ever become part of the world. Women faced no less brutal odds. Childbirth was far more dangerous than today. Narrow hips, large-headed babies, a deadly combination. No midwives, no anesthesia, no help when something went wrong. A mother could bleed out. A baby could suffocate. In many caves, archaeologists have found the skeletons of women and newborns buried together. Around 45,000 to 43,000 years ago, a new kind of human began entering Europe and Western Asia, Homo sapiens. They came from the south, likely migrating out of the Middle East. In some regions, such as the Balkans and the Levant, the two species coexisted, living on the same land, sometimes in neighboring caves. Contact was inevitable. Archaeological sites show evidence of tools from both cultures found together, suggesting an exchange of knowledge and technology. Some researchers believe Homo sapiens adopted certain stoneworking techniques from Neanderthals. In return, Neanderthals began using items not typical of their earlier traditions. Genetic evidence confirms what archaeology suggests. Interbreeding occurred. Today, most people outside of Africa carry between 1% and 2% Neanderthal DNA. That means contact between the two species wasn't just territorial, it led to children. And yet, the Neanderthal legacy in our genes is small. Offspring from these unions were likely few in number, or didn't always pass on their genes. Over time, many parts of the Neanderthal genome were naturally selected out, especially those linked to reproduction and neurological development. This points to a degree of biological incompatibility between the species. It's important to understand, interbreeding wasn't necessarily consensual. Archaeology can't prove the nature of those encounters, but indirect evidence suggests that at least some of them may have been violent. Several clues support this idea. Genetic mixing was rare and often one-sided, typically involving Neanderthal women. Neanderthal sex chromosomes are almost entirely absent from modern human genomes, especially the Y chromosome passed down from males. That absence may suggest that male Neanderthal offspring were excluded over time. In addition, archaeologists have found very little evidence of cultural fusion or long-term shared settlements, which suggests there was no stable cohabitation between the two groups. All of this points to a possibility. The first encounters may have happened under conditions of conflict, migration pressure, or social imbalance, situations where one group held the upper hand in numbers, organization, or technology. In such scenarios, violence can't be ruled out, and modern genetics considers this a plausible part of the story. Around 40,000 years ago, Neanderthals began to disappear. It didn't happen all at once. There was no single event. They vanished in waves, first in Central Europe, then farther west, and later in the mountain regions. The last known traces come from the caves of Gibraltar, dated to about 37,000 years ago. That means they weren't immediately displaced by Homo sapiens. For a time, they still existed, nearby, on the same lands. But their numbers declined. Camps were abandoned. Bones no longer appeared in new layers. Why did they go extinct? Scientists still have no single answer. What they do have is a combination of factors, each one small on its own, but together enough to end a species. Neanderthals were never numerous. Genetic evidence suggests their global population may have never exceeded 50,000 to 70,000 across all of Eurasia. That's an incredibly fragile population. Small groups spread thin across vast territories meant fewer partners, fewer births, and more inbreeding. Their genetic diversity shrank. They simply didn't have the numbers. They also grew slowly, remained dependent on parents longer, and faced high mortality. A woman could die during childbirth. An infant might not survive the winter. Children weren't ready to hunt for years. It meant generations turned over slowly, and losing even a small part of a group could be catastrophic. Between 45,000 and 30,000 years ago, Europe's climate began to shift dramatically. Warm and cold periods began alternating within a single human lifetime. Ecosystems that Neanderthals had relied on collapsed. Game animals migrated or vanished. Plant life changed. Their hunting strategies stopped working, and they couldn't adapt quickly enough. Meanwhile, Homo sapiens were more mobile, more numerous, and more socially organized. Their camps were more densely settled, their tools more diverse, their diets broader. They fished, they gathered shellfish, they used ornaments, they preserved knowledge through language. Neanderthals didn't. Given the same conditions, the species that could adapt more easily survived. This wasn't a war over land, it was a struggle for resilience. Homo sapiens could thrive in changing landscapes, Neanderthals couldn't. As their numbers declined, it wasn't just their population that collapsed, it was their memory, their knowledge. If no one was left to teach, no one could learn. If an elder died and the child was too young to understand, the skill was lost. Hunting, navigation, tool making, anything not passed down through systems or stories simply disappeared. By the end, Neanderthals may have already lost parts of the culture and technique that once helped them survive. Some Neanderthals may have been absorbed through interbreeding. These cases were rare, but they happened. In a way, their disappearance wasn't only through death, it was also through mixing. Neanderthals weren't completely wiped out, but as a distinct biological species, they ceased to exist. Neanderthals didn't build cities, they didn't write books, they left behind no temples, no names. Everything we know about them comes from charred bones, fractured skulls, flint tools, and ash buried in ancient caves. But behind those remnants lies one of the most resilient forms of human life the planet has ever seen. If you found this video fascinating, make sure to leave a like and subscribe to our channel so you don't miss what's coming next. And be sure to check out our other videos, where we uncover some of the darkest and most mysterious chapters in human history.